Armed and ready, South Vietnamese Air Force F-5s commence a strike mission. These planes were designed to very specific requirements. They were to be small, lightweight, and low cost. They were the first weapon system developed by the United States government to meet the conditions and requirements of the Military Assistance Program. These planes were designed to be supplied to the United States' small allies. Over 20 countries employed them. They were the Northrop F-5 Freedom Fighters. The F-5's development defied current trends in fighter aircraft. Other manufacturers were producing planes that were getting bigger and more complex. With the reappraisal of military needs after Korea providing financial support, the United States was pursuing technology. New avionics, missiles and engines dictated growth in the size of fighter aircraft. But the Northrop Company went its own way. Northrop's design team researched the basic question of fighter aircraft and arrived at a set of general requirements. As they saw it, the most important of these was the need to keep the plane small. In a classic case of successful innovation, the reappraisal not only led to the family of F-5s, but has had a much wider effect on the development of fighter aircraft since. The role the plane was built to fill was a humble one, but there was nothing humble about Northrop's little masterpiece. It emerged as a maneuverable and highly effective weapon. These planes are F-5Cs, a rare type. 19 F-5s were re-equipped for the US Air Force combat trials in Vietnam. Because of these modifications, they were given the separate designation. They were much better known as the Scotia Tigers. After their USAF action, the modified planes were handed to the VNAF and became South Vietnam's first modern jet fighters. In time, about 200 F-5s were used by the Vietnamese. The Vietnam combat use of the Freedom Fighters confirmed their effectiveness and underlined how much of a difference they made to the operational capacity of a small nation's air force. Orders flowed in to Northrop, and F-5s spread round the globe. In action, the Vietnamese pilots' aggression combined well with the little plane's accuracy, particularly in ground attack. The plane's load was small, but the precision of its delivery made up for the lack of bulk. The F-5's successful Vietnam deployment underlined the value of Northrop's development work. The design team's obsessions were vindicated. The planes were simple and easy to maintain. Their reliability gave them an edge over other types. They established the highest operational readiness figures with the lowest maintenance man-hours. The F-5's ease of control, stability, maneuverability and accuracy endeared it to its pilots. Unfortunately, it was involved in little air-to-air combat, and its extraordinary agility in a dogfight was not demonstrated. It would be 10 years after Vietnam before the virtues of the lightweight fighter became more widely recognized. Ironically, this would be especially so in the USA, where the Freedom Fighter was developed. The F-5's development goes back to 1955, when Northrop completed the first phase of its fighter studies. They produced a design, the N-156, to serve as the basis for development of either a supersonic trainer or a lightweight fighter. The USAF was uninterested in anything small as a fighter. but the attractions of the design as a trainer could not be ignored. On the 15th of June 1956, the go-ahead was given for the production of prototypes of what became known as the T-38 Talon. On April the 10th, 1959, the first T-38 took to the air in a test series that was remarkable for its smoothness. It was the first supersonic plane to go through testing without a major accident. There were no aerodynamic changes, and the plane exhibited no vices. The T-38 came out with an instantly established reputation for outstanding flight handling and forgiving characteristics. After the success of the initial flights, larger orders flowed in, and by October 1959, production was stepped up from 2 planes a month to 10. Eventually, nearly 1,200 T-38s were built. Meanwhile, the company had continued to develop the fighter version at its own expense, tailoring it to the emerging market with less wealthy American allies. This may have been a gamble, but it was a well-informed one. US defense officials could see the logic of supporting allied nations with equipment. Additionally, it made sense to equip them with combat-capable modern weapons rather than hand-me-downs. An ally with obsolete equipment is of limited use. In May 1958, the company was instructed to go ahead with construction of 3 prototype N-156 fighters. The established T-38 tooling accelerated construction, and the first plane was able to make its first flight only 14 months later. Despite the success of testing, the USAF had no desire for a small plane for its own use, and there was no program to cover development for use by other countries. Only 2 of the prototypes were completed. The third, part constructed, was stored. The US Army became very interested in the N-156F for a time, for ground attack and close support. In competition with other aircraft, the N-156F demonstrated outstanding capabilities. It also impressed with its reliability and ease of maintenance. But the Army competition was called off. The responsibility for operating such high-performance land-based fighter aircraft is something guarded closely by the Air Force. Therefore, if the Freedom Fighter was to come into US service, it would have to be operated by the USAF. The Air Force had already shown no interest in the plane for itself, and was unprepared to operate them for the Army, or let the Army operate them for itself. The N-156F project languished. Northrop were very confident that they had a great plane, and everybody who came into contact with it was impressed. However, there were no buyers. It was to be May 1962, almost 3 years after the first flight, before there was any success for the project. The Department of Defense had continued to review the needs of the United States allies in NATO and SEATO. Existing practice was to supply the poorest countries with aging US jets that had passed their use-by date as far as the Air Force was concerned. This was an inefficient use of the Allied Defense Force resources. What was needed was just what Northrop had designed. The Kennedy administration had vowed to pay any price for the maintenance of freedom, including active re-equipping of Allied forces, and Northrop's plane was the only serious US contender for a lightweight, low-cost fighter. It was therefore announced that the N-156 had been chosen as the defensive arm to be supplied to favored nations under the Military Assistance Program, MAP. In October 1962, the program was formalized. Orders were placed for 2 versions of the N-156F, a single-seat fighter and a twin-seat version to double as a trainer. These were given the USAF designation